Happy Friday, everyone. You've tuned into Business Daily, and I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. We have plenty of stories lined up for you today, so let's get started with the day's highlights. With single-person households on the rise, there's also been a surge in the number of people sharing homes. And we're not just talking about roommates, we're talking about houses specifically built for sharing. The so-called Panama Papers scandal continues to rattle governments and prominent figures around the world. What exactly did these secret records reveal, and what's ahead for those involved? These stories and more coming right up. Korea's central bank has recently been under growing pressure to cut its key interest rate. This as the general elections are on the horizon and the slumbering economy remains with little hope for a solid recovery anytime soon. For more on the pressure the Bank of Korea is facing, here's our Hwang Ji-hye.
The current key rate of 1.5% is accommodative enough to support Korea's growth momentum. That's what Korea's top central banker Lee Ju-yeol has been emphasizing while expressing skepticism about the positive effects of a potential cut. Such remarks have calmed calls for Korea to join the easing frenzy that neighboring countries like China and Japan have been engaged in. But with the general election around the corner, pressure for more easing has returned. Late last month, the ruling Saenuri Party announced an election pledge that demands the Bank of Korea start quantitative easing. It proposed the central bank buy bonds from state-run banks and purchase mortgage-backed securities.
It's hard to say who is right or wrong, as the ruling party's proposal would have side effects. However, it's certainly an issue that policymakers should keep in mind, since Korea is seeing the limitations of its fiscal and key rate policies.
The key concern is that a radical easing policy would cause a massive capital outflow because the local currency would lose value. Unlike Korea, experts say the U.S. and Japan that have already introduced quantitative easing are countries that hold key currencies.
Switzerland and Norway were not able to lay out QE measures, although they're both advanced nations with a stable currency. That's because they also face uncertainties over exchange rate volatility and whether they're able to control it.
Given such concerns coupled with the law guaranteeing the BOK's independence to set monetary policy, some say the ruling party's campaign pledge could not be enforced anyway. However, in light of an upcoming reshuffle of the Monetary Policy Board, market analysts expect the BOK to turn more dovish. This means discussions over more easing are likely to be heated. Hwang Ji-hye, Business Daily.
Some good news from Korea's struggling exports. Outbound shipments for biotechnology and pharmaceuticals are set to have topped the 10 trillion won mark last year. That's roughly $8.6 billion. The Korea Drug Research Association said on Friday that it projects exports to have surpassed the 10 trillion figure, with local biopharmaceutical companies sealing a combined 26 export deals for drug manufacturing technology. Korea's leading drug maker Hanmi Pharmaceuticals played a big part as it alone secured 7 contracts worth $6.9 billion. The association says these numbers are impressive when taking into account the value of the local market, which is around $17 billion. People living in China are now able to enjoy rice grown here in Korea. Korea delivered its first rice shipment in February, and the first sale was registered in Beijing on Thursday. Now, the government is planning to promote further exports of Korean rice to target the premium foods market in China. Our Oh Jung-hee has this report.
An upscale supermarket in Beijing began selling Korean rice on Thursday, the first time Chinese consumers were able to purchase the staple food in Beijing. Korea delivered its first rice export to China in February through China's state-run agricultural trading company COFCO Corporation. This came after China decided to ease up its regulations on Korean rice after the summit meeting last year in September. Beijing citizens seemed to welcome the availability of Korean rice in their market.
I've always wanted to taste Korean rice. I'm happy that I can buy it today.
Last year, I had a chance to eat Korean rice, and it was much more flavorful than Chinese rice.
Korea has now sold 130 tons of rice to China, minimal in comparison to the 2.5 million tons of rice it imports from China every year. But the Korean government is proud of registering its first rice sale in China and aims to focus on quality over quantity. It plans to take over the premium segment of the Chinese rice market with a price that is 5 times more expensive than local rice.
Korean rice is more competitive price point-wise than its competitors from Japan or Taiwan, and I see that it has more advantages in terms of quality and safety than Chinese rice.
Korea's agricultural ministry plans to promote the exporting of more rice to China with the goal of exporting 2,000 tons this year. It'll also step up efforts to cultivate rice varieties that Chinese citizens prefer and expand distribution channels to include online sales and home shopping on TV. Oh Jung-hee, Business Daily.
With a lot of younger people landing jobs at much older ages now, or even pushing back marriage, we're seeing an increasing number of one-person households here in Korea, making up over a third of the country's total households as of last year. And our Lee Joo-young tells us that such a rise is changing Korea's housing landscape as well.
On this quiet street, sitting in the vibrant Hongdae area, these 5 people are holding a meeting on cleaning duties. They're all members of home sharing, or a share house, which is quickly becoming one of the more popular options for housing among university students and office workers in Korea. The biggest reason? Surging housing costs.
The place I used to live in required a security deposit that was several $1,000s, and there was rent on top of that. But here, the deposit is only 2 months' worth of rent, so it's less of a burden.
These homes are built specifically for the purpose of being a share house that includes everything from construction to interior design. So living here, people can save roughly 50 to 70% on monthly rent compared to market price, which can range from $600 to $800 for a small studio in popular neighborhoods. This share house that comes with an urban camping theme is owned by Korea's biggest home sharing firm, Uju. It says business is good despite only charging $300 to $400 per person each month. The company says it plans on adding 200 more rooms this year.
The amount one person pays may not seem like a lot, but all combined, it still ends up being higher than what would be the property's original rent. That's how we turn profits.
Tenants also find the share space attractive for another reason. For student Shin Dong-ju, it wasn't just the cheaper price that led him to move out of his rooftop studio.
I was really lonely when I was living alone, but here I love the fact that there's always at least one other person in the house to greet me.
These factors combined, home sharing is quickly gaining popularity. But experts say supply still lags greatly behind demand, and the new trend will not be enough to alleviate the housing burden for young people.
To resolve the problem, it's not only the private sector, but the government that needs to act. It should create rental options for young people and help bring down rent.
The professor adds market competition in this budding industry will inevitably push up prices, again making it a viable option only for some. But for those already living in this shared space, it's an experience to enjoy. Aside from the minor complications like using the bathroom in the morning, Dong-ju says he's happy for the most part.
I've lived here for the past 6 months and plan to stay here for another half a year. I'd like to stay in a share house until I get a job or get married.
It's the idea of sharing time with others and the heavy burden of rent that act as a dual attraction for younger tenants who are in search of a second home. Lee Joo-young, Business Daily.
It's Friday, and we're now joined by our Eunice Kim in the studio for a look at a major story that broke this week. The biggest known leak of offshore data, now known as the Panama Papers. Hello, Eunice.
Hello.
All right, so this is quite tremendous. More than 11 million documents, and we're already seeing repercussions from it.
We are. Iceland's Prime Minister, he resigned from his post this week as a result of the findings, and many other leaders are finding themselves on the defensive as well, including Russia's Vladimir Putin and China's Xi Jinping for indirect ties. Now, this year-long investigation by journalists sheds light on what authorities have said they're trying to rein in all along: the use of offshore accounts for criminal purposes, including tax evasion, money laundering, and sanctions dodging. Take a look.
The British Virgin Islands is a Caribbean paradise, home to 28,000 people and the site of hundreds of thousands of companies? Well, at least on paper. An overwhelming majority of them are shell companies, or empty companies with the sole purpose of serving as a vehicle for other business purposes. The eye-watering leak of more than 11 million documents from one of the sector's biggest players is shedding light on the underground world of offshore accounts. Mossack Fonseca's emails, client accounts, and financial records over a 40-year period, pieced together by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, show the most popular base to set up a shell company is the British Virgin Islands. The law firm creating more than 113,000 accounts there, far exceeding its own base of Panama. ICIJ reports 29 Forbes-listed billionaires and 12 current or former world leaders were among the holders of the more than 200,000 offshore accounts Mossack Fonseca had set up. And within days of the first revelations,
Prime Minister, about personal, but you are indicating that I have not paid taxes on it.
the ensuing uproar's first political victim was Iceland's Prime Minister, who quit his post this week within days of revelations his wife had owned a paper company with big claims on his country's collapsed banks. The documents also showed close associates of Russian President Vladimir Putin were part of a billion-dollar money laundering ring run by a Russian bank subject to U.S. and EU sanctions. As Moscow dismissed the allegations as a U.S. plot to destabilize Russia, China's foreign ministry called the reports groundless accusations and stepped up its censors after relatives of the country's leaders, including President Xi Jinping, were discovered in the files. The now infamous Panamanian firm says it believes it is the innocent victim of an external hack.
New news would be who is investigating the hack. We're amazed nobody said, hey, a crime's been committed here.
Global banks are also scrambling. HSBC, Credit Suisse, UBS, and Societe Generale were found to have done business with Mossack Fonseca, just a handful of what ICIJ says was a network of more than 500 banks and their subsidiaries. It says the countries with the most active client base by number of incorporations were Hong Kong, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. Singapore and Russia round out the top 10.
And Korea has not been immune to this story. I mean, the government has been investigating nearly 200 people who were named in these Panama Papers, right?
Right. The Financial Supervisory Service and the National Tax Service are running parallel probes on 195 names that were found in those documents, including the son of a former president, No Tae-woo. Now, reports say the younger No had made 3 shell companies on the Virgin Islands on the same day back in May of 2012, and the suspicion here is that it could hold the former president's illicit funds. There are, of course, also concerns of tax dodging, as current laws requires any Korean national to report to the Bank of Korea upon opening a paper company.
And that's not the only Korea link. There's also a link to North Korea and its nuclear weapons program.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Reports say one of the entities doing business with Mossack Fonseca was a firm called DCB Finance, and its owners were found to be based in Pyongyang and to have links to a sanctioned bank that was helping fund the state's nuclear weapons program. The Panamanian firm later did pull its business with the firm, but certainly this is far from the only case of shady business. There were at least 33 entities placed under U.S. sanctions on Mossack Fonseca's client list.
And a noticeable absence, however, is the United States, considering that a lot of wealthy people come from that country. So what could be the reasons?
Well, it is important to note here that the probe is still ongoing. We haven't heard everything about this finding, and there have been addresses linked back to the U.S., so more could be coming. But an interesting point to be made here is that the U.S. itself has a few states of its own that have incredibly lax laws that make it easy for companies to form shell companies and evade taxes. In fact, the state of Nevada was the 8th most popular destination for the Panamanian law firm, as you see there. The other was Wyoming. And one Australian professor had told Reuters back a couple years ago that Somalia had slightly higher standards than Wyoming and Nevada. And another reason would be that Americans could prefer servicers in English-speaking countries like Bermuda or Singapore. All this going to show that as incredible as these revelations are, this is just a piece of the pie.
I believe this is definitely going to evolve down the line, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much for coming in today, Eunice.
You bet.
And that wraps it up for today and this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week with more business news that matters to you. Until then, goodbye.